Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olivia Tuller and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on August 24th with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled 10 Steps to Streamlining Your Genealogical Research. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Maureen Brady on the Old Northwest, researching the Great Lakes states. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Maureen. Maureen Brady, a former school librarian and computer educator, has over 35 years' experience with family history research. She has traced her Scottish roots back to the end of the 17th century and beyond, and has also pursued Chicago and the Midwest, the Trans-Allegheny U.S., Quebec, Irish, and Swedish research. Maureen has made numerous presentations to Illinois and Wisconsin genealogical societies, libraries, conferences, and workshops, including presenting at the 2002 National Genealogical Society Conference in the States and the 2016, 2017, and 2018 Central Florida Family History Conference. She is a member of the Genealogical Speakers Guild, as well as a life member of the Aberdeen and Northeast Scotland Family History Society, the Chicago Genealogical Society, the Ohio Genealogy Society, and the McHenry County, Illinois Genealogical Society. She is also active in the British Interest Group of Wisconsin and Illinois, the Chicago Scotch Genealogical Group, and the Lake County, Illinois Genealogical Society. And we'll now turn the time over to Maureen if she's ready.
So this is focusing on just 5 states. The Old Northwest or the Northwest, there it came. We've got the whole screen, so now we're good. So the original territory northwest of the Ohio River, as it was called, included a small piece of what is today Minnesota. But for the most part, we are talking about the 5 states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And this was really the first territory of the newly founded United States immediately after 1787. So wanting to take a look at first the historical, I feel that especially in the case of this particular part of the United States, but is certainly true in all parts of the states, you have to have a good background into the historical main dates that could affect where the records are, who was keeping the records, and what type of records may actually have been created. So I always try to do a quick overview of the historical dates that might affect what you're doing. If you are lucky enough to have people in the 5 states of the Great Lakes as early as the fur trade, and this is entirely possible. We're not talking just English here. At this point in time, we are talking about the French coming down up the St. Lawrence River to Lake Ontario and then into the rest of the drainage of the Great Lakes. And they were coming into this region very, very early. So what I wanted to show you, just to give you a sense of how early this settlement would be, in the 17th century, the first really permanent and major trading post or fort was Kaskaskia down in southern Illinois. Creve Coeur is also Illinois. Prairie du Chien is in Wisconsin on the Mississippi. Peoria is Illinois. And then finally in the 1690s, they did establish a fort in today's Michigan, but it is on Lake Michigan, not in the Detroit area. Madeline Island is the first one that was established in Lake Superior area, and then Cahokia, which is also in southern Illinois. So in the 17th century, the French were more interested in establishing trade routes and establishing their presence in the area that drained into the Mississippi River. So that meant primarily Lake Michigan and some parts of Lake Superior because of the fur trade going that far north. They weren't as interested as is expanding their influence east along Lake Erie or even Lake Huron. To them, it was the fur trade that came out of the greater expanse of the North American continent, and that meant access to the Mississippi River. And so in the 17th century, most of their, if not all of their forts in the area we're talking about tonight were along the Mississippi or in Wisconsin or Illinois, with the one exception of St. Joseph in Michigan. Then moving into the 18th century, now they start to move eastward in their interest and in their influence. So Detroit is established in 1701. Fort Wayne, Indiana is in 1715. Michilimackinac, which is Mackinac City, not the island, but the city, that was established at the strait between Michigan and Huron. Then Green Bay, West Lafayette, Chartres in Illinois, Vincennes in Indiana, and the earliest one that is of any importance is Sandusky on Lake Erie in 1745. So they still haven't moved down to the Ohio River. They're getting close with Vincennes, but they're still emphasizing their access to the Great Lakes and thence to the Mississippi River down to New Orleans, or what would become New Orleans. As we move later then into the colonial era, when the British take over, it begins with actually before that treaty is signed. In 1662, the King of England grants to Connecticut colony the lands west of the Pennsylvania River as far as they would go to the ocean. So in effect, Connecticut colony had the rights to Ohio all the way to the Pacific along a thin, narrow border of land that went through every single today's states all the way out to California. They were never settled. It was just the rights to that area, but all of that was, of course, across the Allegheny Mountains and with huge Native American presence that were not very welcoming. And so nothing was really much done, but Connecticut did have claim to that area beginning in 1662. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris ends the French and Indian War, as it was called here in the US. In Europe, it was called the 7 Years' War. And France, as a part of that treaty then, France cedes New France to Great Britain. Now, New France covered everything from the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, the whole valley of the St. Lawrence, all of the Great Lakes, and the entire valley of the Mississippi River. So that is a huge piece of territory that was ceded to Great Britain from France, but it's only the ownership, or if one wants to say the governance. The people who lived in those areas were and remained mostly French. In 1778, after the beginning of the Revolution, and after the Battle of Kaskaskia with George Rogers Clark, Virginia then claims their right across the mountains and all the way to the Mississippi River. And they claimed it and called it the Illinois County. Now, it included not only parts of today's Illinois, but also parts of Indiana and parts of Kentucky. Again, a narrow strip, just they take the borders of Virginia and then just draw them across to the Mississippi River, and you would get a sense of what part of was Illinois County in 1778. In 1784, toward the end of the Revolutionary War, Virginia cedes that back to the United States, cedes control of that Illinois County. It was not a country, it was actually a county of Virginia, to the United States. So between 1778 and 1784, that little short period of time, you have Illinois County in the Virginia records. So if you are looking for settlers that happen to get into that area very early, perhaps they had gone with George Rogers Clark and had stayed, or they had gotten to Pittsburgh and gone on down the Ohio River, whatever the case may be. If you do have ancestors that are in that part of the Great Lakes states between 1778 and 1784, you're going to be looking for them in Virginia records under Illinois County. I point that out because most people wouldn't think Virginia automatically when you're thinking Illinois. Then in 1786, Connecticut cedes its claims to the Western lands to the United States. In effect, that was the lands to the Mississippi. Nothing was actually said about the lands west of the Mississippi that Connecticut had originally been granted. In 1787, then, after the end of the Revolutionary War and the signing of the Constitution, Congress creates the territory northwest of the Ohio River, otherwise called the Northwest Territory for short. Literally, it was everything that was northwest of the Ohio from all the way down to the Mississippi River. And today that is 5 states for the most part. So let's now move into the territorial period. If I'm going too fast, put a question into the chat, and I'll try to get back to it then during our question session at the end. In the territorial period, though, 1787, the territory is formed, but it is still very much under the control of French and British fur traders who never left. The British came and created their little forts and trading posts, but the French never gave up anything that they had already settled. So you have a mixture of French and British in the area of the Northwest Territory in scattered forts and trading posts all along the Great Lakes and the major rivers. Nothing in terms of a town, really. It's mostly just fortified settlements. Also in 1787, then, after the war has ended, and people have discovered through George Rogers Clark's campaigns and a few others, that there is a lot of land to be had north and west of the Ohio River. So moving down the Ohio from Pittsburgh or up through Kentucky from the Cumberland Gap and the paths and roads that Daniel Boone and his companies had created, settlement begins in southern Ohio along the Ohio River, not going too far inland at this point. There was also, going back to the French, in 1791, Congress enacted a special act granting 400 acres to every head of a family who had made improvements before 1788. And because it was before 1788, most of those grantees were French. They were either the descendants or the actual original settlers from Quebec who had come down the lakes and the rivers to settle within that area. And they were each granted 400 acres. Mainly it was the land they had already lived on and created cabins and such on, but had never had ownership. And so this act of Congress granted them the ownership, it grandfathered them in basically. Then in 1800, Indiana Territory now has enough people along the Ohio River Valley for it to claim its own territory, because Ohio is now getting so many people, it's too many for it to be one territory. So 1800, Indiana Territory is created, which includes Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Western Michigan, basically Lake Superior and Lake Michigan states. And the Northwest Territory is reduced to Eastern Michigan, Huron, Erie, and then Ohio. So you can kind of see where it divided somewhat down the middle third. The eastern third of Michigan was included now in the Northwest Territory. But 3 years later, Ohio becomes a state. They have enough population to do that. And so now Eastern Michigan is transferred to the Indiana Territory. So in 1803, Indiana Territory is all of the states except Ohio are part of the Indiana Territory. Between 1800 and 1820, settlers that are primarily Scots-Irish, meaning that you will see a lot of Scots-Irish names in all of these settlements, began moving from Kentucky and Tennessee to southern Indiana and southern Illinois, again, primarily along the Ohio River drainage, along the creeks and rivers and streams that emptied into the Ohio River in those two states. And you'll see them working their way north from the Ohio, but not inland from the Mississippi. 1809, Indiana finally has a big enough population. It becomes a state. And now what's left over is the Michigan Territory on the east side of Lake Michigan and the Illinois Territory on the west side of Lake Michigan, and that also includes Wisconsin. So if you have early settlers along the Mississippi or the Fox River in Wisconsin, in 1809, they are now part of Illinois. Before 1809, they were part of Michigan. These dates become important in terms of where you're going to look for the records. In 1818, Illinois becomes a state, so Wisconsin is now transferred to the Michigan Territory. So Wisconsin has kind of been the lost child in all of this, originally part of the territory northwest of the Ohio, then part of Indiana, then part of Illinois, then part of Michigan, then part of Illinois. Now it's back to Michigan. It just, because Wisconsin is really the last part of this territory that gained enough population to be its own state. And so they had to keep transferring it around. But one of the key things about this is that in 1820 and 1830, the Erie Canal opens a gateway to Ohio and the entire territory, all points west. And because of that, settlement in Wisconsin begins to pick up. But when you look for them, if you look for Wisconsin enumerations in the 1820 and 1830 census, you will not find any because they are part of Michigan for those two census years. It's entirely possible you may have relatives, your ancestors there in what is today Wisconsin in the 1820 and 30 era, but they're not going to be listed as Wisconsin residents. They're going to be listed as Michigan Territory residents. 1830, Milwaukee, Racine, and Southport, today's Kenosha, are all established along the Lake Michigan shore to the north of Chicago, but they all have fairly good ports for sailing ships and for commerce. So they all are established in the 1830s and grow quite rapidly. In September of 1833, the last treaty with the Native Americans east of the Mississippi was signed. It ended the Black Hawk War. You may remember that war because of Abraham Lincoln actually serving in that. But it was September of 1833 when the last treaty was signed, effectively ending a Native American presence east of the Mississippi, except for some reservations which are still in existence. In December of 1833, the town of Chicago was organized. The little community that had been around Fort Dearborn had finally acquired enough people to actually organize a town. Most of them had come by way of the Great Lakes, and most of them were from New England. 1836, finally, the Wisconsin Territory is created, separate from Michigan. And then in 1837, Michigan becomes a state, and Chicago is incorporated as a city. You can see the amount of growth that occurred between 33 and 37 for Chicago, that it went from town to city in only 4 years. In the 1830s and 40s, the settlers began arriving from Ireland, Germany, and Norway. The Irish were primarily because of the potato famine in the late 40s, but there were other driving forces in all of those countries that sent them to the U.S. and primarily then to the Great Lakes states. Good farming country, The climate was very similar to what they were used to at home. They had a lot of timber to build their houses. So it was a good area for Europeans, especially Western Europeans, to come and settle during that period. And then finally, in 1848, Wisconsin becomes a state. Ohio was 1803, Wisconsin is 1848. So it took 45 years for the territory northwest of the Ohio River to go from territory to 5 states. So statehood, I just want to quickly show you these. I'll show you later where I found these maps, but they are a series of maps that shows the changes in county boundaries for every state in the United States by year. So here is Ohio in 1803, and you can see that the population is along the Ohio and up toward Pittsburgh. There's some up here along the shore of Lake Erie, but it's a very large county, and these counties basically do not have many people up in this end. They would all be down here. In 1809, when Indiana becomes a state, it is, you can see right along the border with Ohio and then down the Ohio River. And there would have been settlement here, but all of this is one county, Knox County, in 1809, because from this point north, there's very, very little white settlement. Who's up there are primarily Native Americans. And this little piece right here that's all crosshatched, that is an unclaimed territory. It could be Indiana, it could be Illinois, they're really not sure. 1818, when Illinois becomes a state, you can see again, it's along the rivers, the Wabash, the Ohio, and the Mississippi, and the streams entering into either all of those watersheds. This is where everyone lived in 1880. There were some scattered French settlements still along the Illinois and the upper Mississippi, but in terms of actual settlement, this is where it would have occurred by 1818 in Illinois. Wisconsin is 1837, and here again, we're talking the south, kind of the southern half, if you go to the southeast. And all of these were counties that were created at the time of statehood. This is why they're blue on this map. This area is unclaimed. This is a county going up to the lake and all the way up to Michigan at this point. Remember, this had been part of Michigan Territory, so it goes up to Lake Superior as well. Or this is Michigan, I'm sorry, this is Michigan. So this is all the way up to Lake Superior. This is where Houghton is. This is where Marquette is, and Sault Ste. Marie and Mackinac Island. But most of your settlement is down here along the border with Ohio, along Lake Erie, or along Lake Michigan. And again, the watersheds feeding into that. And then Wisconsin in 48, primarily just in the southeast third. There is some settlement, again, mostly French. And in this area, it is claimed, but it is still not organized. And that's why this is gray. This is a county that's been created, but it doesn't have a government yet. And same with these two. So all of these states started from the Ohio River or the Mississippi and worked up and in as they settled those regions. To give you an idea of how they traveled, this is just a quick one. This is the main canals that were used to settle the Great Lakes states and also to move from east to west. So we have the Erie up here, but here's the Ohio and Erie that comes down from Erie and all the way down to Portsmouth on the river. There's the Miami and Erie, which starts from Toledo, goes down to Cincinnati, and it has another branch that goes down to the Wabash, down to Evansville. And we also have a canal in the Illinois area that was built between Chicago and Peru to connect to the Illinois River and on down. In addition to that, by 1860, we have all of these railroads that have been created. You can see that even some of them have crossed the Mississippi River. But if you take a look at our 5 states, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois are crisscrossed with railroads by 1860. Michigan has some in its south end, and so does Wisconsin. So if you're here coming into Castle Garden, New York, and you have relatives who are in northern Illinois, and they're telling you how great the farmland is, you have two choices. You can go up to Albany and come across on the Erie Canal by ship and then by a railroad this way, or you can just get on a railroad here and follow it all the way to Chicago and even out to the northernmost towns of Illinois along the Wisconsin border. So by the time 1860 comes, movement from the ports of the East inland to the old Northwest Territory are relatively easy. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't a burdensome trip or a time-consuming trip, but you could do it. You weren't forced to do it on horseback or by foot. You could carry your goods with you and so on. So in 1860, this is what the 5 states look like. We have fully formed county governments in Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the 2 northernmost ones, are still organizing as they move north. So in 1859-60, these were all brand new counties. You can see there's even now a new one over here on the Upper Peninsula. And Wisconsin still has a lot of unsettled land in the North Woods. This is all of that timber area that was eventually clear cut, and now we have second growth timber up there. But at this point in time, there were really no towns. It was all logging camps by 1860. So this is what it looked like just before the Civil War. So enough history. Let's start looking at where we can find information. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is the FamilySearch Research Wiki. This is something you can use for every state, not just the 5 we're talking about tonight. And actually for almost all the countries in the world, there is at least one article with some ideas and helps and databases that will help you with your research. And this is going to be a quick overview, but I wanted you to know about the wiki because there's over 100,000 articles and they add over 100 new ones every day. Not just revised, but new. And they have links to databases, websites, other resources. This is the area I go to first when I'm researching an area for the first time, or because I work in a family search center and I have someone come in, a patron, and it's not an area I'm familiar with. My first stop was always the FamilySearch Wiki. So you would go on the home page for FamilySearch, be sure you're signed in, and then you search. When you open that up, the drop-down box, it's the very last choice, Research Wiki. And then when you open that up, you get a map. And these are interactive maps, but the quickest way to get to where you want to be is up here in this box where you can enter the name of a country, the name of a state, the name of a large city, a railroad, a canal name, an occupation. You can add all of that up here, but we're going to do, let's say, Illinois. So I'm entering Illinois, and as soon as I type the word, it gives me a drop-down box with all of the articles with the first word Illinois. So we've got the Illinois-Michigan Canal, the Illinois Central Railroad, cemeteries, land, and property. But the very first one, always at the top, is the Illinois genealogy page. And that's the one I suggest you start at, and then you can go on and explore the others. And this is in your handout. It is the one part that you might want to be sure to go back and look at. It's the last part of your handout. I gave you this particular screenshot. And there's a lot of information here, one of which is these boundary changes for Illinois counties. This is where I got those maps of the county boundaries right here. But what I want you to look at is the blue button. Every page has this blue button. It's on the opening page in the bottom left. And when you click on that blue button, you will get an organized list of all of the databases for, in this case, Illinois. It could be Ohio, Wisconsin, any one of the states we're discussing. And these are all of the databases from FamilySearch, Ancestry, Find My Past, Billy and Graves, My Heritage, and a few other kind of standalones. They're all listed here in one place. So what I usually do is I'll print this page, and then I can easily go through and note if I've looked at something or know I need to look at it. It kind of gives me a way to keep track. But you'll notice that this is FamilySearch, and it's an index only to births for Illinois. The U.S. marriage is a Find My Past, and this is an index only, and there's a subscription fee. This is from the Illinois State Archives. This one's from My Heritage, and so forth. $ means there's subscription fees, and if there is no $, that's a free site. Now, the $, you can have your own subscriptions so that you can use them at home. Some public libraries also have access to those subscription sites, but all family search centers have free access to those sites. All of the family search centers nationwide have free access to Ancestry, Find My Past, any of these with a $. So if you go to the Family Search Center, you can use these for free without worrying about a subscription. And you can kind of get an idea what's here. This goes on for 4 pages. I'm only showing you the beginning part of it to give you an idea of what's in this blue button database that you can get to very quickly. If I continue down the Illinois page, then you're going to get information pertaining to that state in any. It could be government, it could be, for instance, here's the family search centers, so you can look for a family history. They haven't changed the name yet to Family Search Center, but you could look for that. They have Facebook communities, which are other researchers working with Illinois and so on. There's another list of historical records and images on Family Search and links to other databases down here. But look at all of the trails, the migration routes. All of the blue ones are separate articles within the wiki. So if you have early settlers in Northwest Illinois, you would want to check out the Pecatonica Trail because that's where that is. If you have settlers along the eastern part of Illinois, from Chicago down to Kentucky, and they move around a bit, you might want to check out the Illinois Central Railroad because that was a major migration route, emigration route within Illinois up and down that railroad in the eastern portion of the state. You also have some other trails up here, the Chicago-Detroit Road, which was established quite early. So ships would come into Detroit from Buffalo, and then they would go from there by road to Chicago, and so on. So this is the wiki article on example, state of Illinois, but all of the states have something similar, and all of them have that blue button with the link to all of the databases. The other thing on Family Search that I really wanted to talk about is the digital library. Most people either aren't aware of it or they may be slightly aware of it, but they've never really looked. The digital library is the option just above Research Wiki. And if you click there, it looks like this. And it says 500,000 genealogy books, but there was an article in the blog about a month ago that says that number has now gone over 600,000. So this is a cooperative library between the Family Search Library in Salt Lake, the BYU Library in Provo, and about 15 other major libraries across the United States with significant genealogical and family history collections. And what all of these libraries are doing are identifying what is in their holdings that is out in the public domain, no longer copyrighted. They then digitize them, and then it all comes into this digital library. And so Family Search is hosting this 600,000 volume plus library of digital material. They are all uncopyrighted, out of copyright, so you can find them, download them, save them, and you now have it added to your library. So this is the basic search, but there is an advanced search in which you can search by keyword, by title, by a subject, or even by a specific author. And you can combine these if you wish, because there are Boolean searches here. Well, I had a book that I always like to use as a test. And the full title is John Blair of Guilford County, North Carolina, and Some of His Descendants. Well, I went to the title box, but I didn't have to type the entire title. I just had to type the key words of the title for my search. And then I would hit the search button. And when it came up, now this is the only drawback to the digital library. Hopefully at some point in time, they'll allow you to do some filtering. But right now, I put in 4 words in the search box, and it is showing me every hit with 1 to 4 of those words. So it could just have had Guilford. It could, in fact, just have the word county. So because it's using that kind of a search, I have over 162,000 results. But it will show it to you with the most number of words matched first, and then working its way down to 1 word. So all 4 of them are here. Here's John Blair and Guilford County. It is italicized to highlight it, so I can see that all 4 of my words were part of it. And in fact, this is the book I was looking for. I would click on this, and here's the full cataloging of it. Tells me it's in English and so on. These are the main families that are described in the book. It's 280 pages, but I can come over here and view inside. And now it opens up to the first page of the book, which happens to, in this case, to be a map of the original land grant. Once the book is opened, you can go through it page by page, but you can also download it to your own computer or to a USB drive or to an external drive. And once it's on your own device, computer or drive, it's now yours. And it's in PDF format, Adobe format, so you can open it up in Adobe on your computer, and then every word is searchable within that book. And you can search by name of farm, by name of community, by name of stream, by name of cemetery, whatever you may want to look for within that book. This is extremely useful because so many of those older histories have no indexes, and this way you can actually look for any word. So you would download up here to your drive or to your computer, and then that's your copy. And you don't even have to open the internet at any time in the future to look at this book. So you can create a wonderful little reference library for the areas that you are researching and the names that you are researching. So that is within the digital books section, the digital library on FamilySearch. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about Ancestry in just one part of Ancestry. I think most of us have used it, and I think most of us have been used to entering a name and maybe some dates and places. But there's another way to access information in Ancestry, and that's through the state databases. So when you open up Ancestry, and you come up to your search window, and when that opens up, you want to choose all collections, because it changes this home screen to this home screen. And you're going, well, this is a search window and I can start putting in names. Yes, you can, but ignore all of this, scroll to the bottom, and you'll now see a map of the United States with all of the states listed. So you can click up here on the map, or you can click on the word to go directly to that state. Or there's also maps for Africa, Asia, Europe, and so on. So I'm going to pick Ohio. And when I choose that, it takes me to this page. These are all databases in Ancestry pertaining to Ohio records. This is at the state level. I can also come over here and pick a particular county. The numbers tell me how many databases are available for that county. Any one of these could be useful. You'll see there are 6 here and it's showing only 5. This has 39 under Ohio birth, marriage, death. There's 36 military databases. It tells you how many names are in this database. So the city directories of Ohio and Florida, why they are put together, I do not know, but there's almost 5 million names in that database. If we look at the 1850 census of defective, dependent, and delinquent, there's 325,000 names in that in the state of Ohio. Well, in the United States, this is US. As another example of unusual, this is under the court and financial, and take a look at some of these databases that Ancestry has. Cuyahoga County tax lists back to 1819, Jefferson County court records to 1797. We've got indexed early land ownership and township plats back to 1785, even before the Constitution. Homestead records, the laws of the Northwest Territory, which will probably have people's names in them. You can kind of see what's here. This wills and probates, this is just the Ohio section, but they are working on this. This is one of the current projects for Ancestry, and they are working on doing this in all of the states. And in some areas, like I know in Southern Illinois, because that's where I've used it the most, it is pretty complete, and it is the entire probate file or the entire will books in digital copies, so you can actually get to the records at home. These are very easy to access, very easy to search, and you can see there's 3.3 million here. So it's an extremely large resource where it hopefully will name not only spouses and children, but even perhaps grandchildren that are heirs. So this is just an example of the databases for the states that are available on Ancestry. Now, the weird thing or the strange thing is that when you do a name search on Ancestry, it doesn't catch all of these databases. So the only way you can know for sure that you've looked at every potential place on Ancestry for your information is to do it a state-by-state list, just as I showed you. Newspapers are a big resource. Newspapers were printed very, very early in all of these areas, not only for the news, but for the advertisements that stores and up-and-coming new businesses would have wanted to put in to let people know that they were in business. Here's an example of one from the Juneau County Argus in Wisconsin. It happens to be my great-great-grandfather, but there's a story that he died on the 21st of whatever the date of this paper is, which the clipping did not note. He was born in 1767, so he was 114 and so on. This is the type of information you can get out of a newspaper. Yes, this gives me a death date, but it also tells me a little bit about his history. It tells me a little bit about his character, which small town newspapers very often did. Here's another one that I found from the Chicago Tribune. This is from 1932. This is one of my cousins, Al Turney, and it is explaining how he's opening up a legalized restaurant place with beer now that beer can be served again. And it goes on about him doing that, and there's a long story associated. And there's a tax question apparently as part of this. And when I get into this, Al Turney was quite a known man in Chicago for a lot of different reasons. So in the Chicago Tribune for about 20 years, I'm still finding articles about this man in the Chicago Trib. So newspapers can be very useful. There are 3 that I would like to discuss today, 3 sites. The first one is Chronicling America. This is hosted by the Library of Congress. And when you see the URL in your handout, you'll see that it's loc.gov. It is a free access to historic newspapers that have been digitized. The funds are coming from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the whole program is called the National Digital Newspaper Program. This is the homepage for Chronicling America. And you can do your searches. There's an advanced search option where you can tie it into a particular state or even newspaper. But two things this is very useful for is here's a list of all of their digitized newspapers on Chronicling America that you can dig down to an actual county level to see if there's something from a county here. But over here is a complete list of every single newspaper that has ever been published anywhere in the United States from 1690 to the present day. It's organized by state, and it is something that I would suggest you look at to see if it's possible. Just a second, please. Okay, going on from there, Newspaper Archive is the next one I would like to talk about. It is a subscription website, but is available at the Family Search Centers, and some public libraries have it. And this is what their homepage looks like. And the best way to get the information you need here is to go to Browse up here, and then it opens up into columns. And so you would choose your country, then your state, then your city. And then once the city comes up, it would show you all the newspapers that are available for that city. You would choose the newspaper, and then you can go look for your name. It works from left to right. And this is how the search function is on Newspaper Archive. Newspaper Archive is not as large as Chronicling America or as the next one I'm going to talk about, but it does have some cities and towns in the United States that nobody else has as a digital format. So it is certainly well worth checking. And the third one I wanted to talk about is newspapers.com. And it is a subscription site also. Many public libraries have it. And it should be noted that Ancestry includes an index to the marriages and deaths in these newspapers on their website. You'll get hints. And this is what theirs looks like, and it is a relatively straightforward search. People ask me which is the best. So here's Michael Brady. He was in Kenosha between those years. Chronicling America gives me 185 hits statewide, not specifically to Kenosha. I get 0 hits in Newspaper Archives and 11 hits in newspapers. So you can see that usually you need to check all 3 to be sure you've covered all possible newspapers. Some additional sources because we're running out of time. The Percy Periodical Source Index from the Genealogical Center at the Allen County Public Library. Is an index to over, I don't even know the number, but for local history periodicals and genealogical periodicals, you can search by any of these options. And here's an example for one search that I did just by location. And then here's all your topics. So there's 399 articles about the history of this area. There are 88 for miscellaneous records. There's one about the Spanish-American War. And you can click on any of these, and it would give you a list of all of the articles, the particular journal or magazine that it's in, the date, the year, and who is the publisher of that particular item. And then you can order at the bottom of this chart, there is a link to order copies from the Allen County Public Library of any of these articles you want. Very reasonable fee. And it's a huge, huge resource. All of these small genealogical societies, large genealogical societies, we all publish some sort of newsletters, magazines, periodicals, journals, whatever. And most of them send a copy to Allen County. And that's where this database comes from. Extremely useful. This is the actual Allen County Genealogy Center in the library, what it looks like today. And I'm putting it in here as an additional source because certainly FamilySearch Library in Salt Lake City, the Brigham Young Library in Provo are important. But if you're talking about the Midwest and you happen to live in the Midwest or close to it, there are two libraries that I would strongly suggest you visit and spend some research time in. One is the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center. It's a floor of that library devoted strictly to family history and genealogy. The other one is the Wisconsin State Historical Library. This is their main reading room. It was established in 1848 when Wisconsin became a state and has been collecting the history of North America north of the Rio Grande. So all of the United States and all of Canada are represented in its collections, as well as major U.S. collections like the census and passenger lists and so on. It has a vast selection, and it has the second largest collection of newspapers in microfilm. The only one that's bigger is the Library of Congress. So this is in Madison, Wisconsin. The Allen County Public Library is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Another one, if you're in that part of the world, is the Ohio Genealogical Society Library in Belleville. This was a building purpose-built for the library by the OGS. It is a wonderful research facility. It is open almost every day of the week, I believe, and it has trained personnel working there. It also has a manuscript selection section where it's call out as a brief idea of what's there. It's mostly Ohio, but there are some material particularly pertaining to Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Indiana, people that may have come into Ohio from those areas, as well as the travel on the Great Lakes. If sometimes you find an oddity, like the University of Illinois is actually doing a digital newspaper collection for some odd groupings of newspapers, Farm, Field, and Fireside, the farm newspapers of Illinois, the vaudeville newspapers. Chicago was a huge vaudeville center, and there were a lot of newspapers that were produced by that. College newspapers for Illinois colleges and so on. There's over 204,000 issues so far digitized, and they keep a map, and all of all of the white counties, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. All of the pink counties have some representation in this digital newspaper collection, and they're growing. It's working on it. So you would always want to kind of check back. But this is Illinois. It's a project that the University of Illinois decided to do. So you don't know where else you might find this kind of a project, but the wiki helps you find these. Don't forget your religious sources. And in your handout, I gave you the list of 10 databases on Ancestry that are specific church records, and they are digitized and indexed. And the thing about Ancestry is they don't come up on that list of other records for a state. So you have to go to the catalog and you enter the first few words of the state exactly, and then the catalog will get you to the database you're looking for. Also, I gave you a list in your handout of some ethnic locations, some ethnic resources for particular groups that settled in the Midwest. And then don't forget the hometown. The Genealogical Society, many of the small towns, if they have enough budget, they actually have their own library and their own research center. The churches, certainly, the cemeteries, and of course, the courthouses. And you can do it. It's possible, and it's fun. You get into some really interesting records when you're working in the Midwest and the Upper Great Lakes. And the handout, except for the last the last page is 2 screen prints from FamilySearch. One is the digital books search window, and the other one is the first part of the Illinois wiki page, just so you can get an idea of what those look like. And the rest of it is really just lists of URLs for particular sources that I have found useful when I'm working in these 5 states. And certainly there are others, but I picked the ones that seem to have the most the largest amount of information or the most helpful information. So when you get your handout, hopefully you'll see that.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on August 24th with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled 10 Steps to Streamlining Your Genealogical Research. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.